on Thursday, July 25th. And if we can start with item number 1, the roll call.
Commissioner Javandal.
Present.
Commissioner Jordan.
Here.
Commissioner Morawski.
Back.
Commissioner Paulson.
Here.
And Chair Del Rosario.
Present. And item 2 is public comment. This is for any item that is not on the agenda. So if there are members of the public that would wish to speak to anything related to traffic and safety, come on up.
I would like to note, just for the record, that you have 4 emails that were attached regarding the intersection Solano-Masonic, as well as some incidents involving vehicles traveling into storefronts on Solano Avenue. And I can speak to those a little bit when we get to the police data.
For those of you who just came in, if there are items that you would like to raise public comment on that are not on the agenda, you can, then now's your chance to speak. Okay. All right, moving over to item 3, presentation 3-1 is the monthly police data on collisions and citations.
This first graph shows the number of auto versus pedestrian collisions per month, and in the month of July, there were none. Do keep in mind with all this data, it's preliminary and subject to refinement as the police department completes their reporting. This is bicycle collisions per month, and there was 1 reported this month.
I think you probably mean June.
June, I'm sorry, yes. So yes, for all the data sets, it's for June. This graph shows the vehicle collisions per month. There were a total of 16, which is the top line, the bluish line, and 5 of those were injury accidents, which is the gray line below. And then this is the number of moving citations for the month of June. It was 47. And the last graphic is the number of driving under influence arrests, and there were 3 reported to us from the police department. With respect to the collisions that you received some correspondence on, there have been an unusual rash of cars going into storefronts on Solano Avenue in the last 2 weeks. There have been 3 of them. None of them were serious. 2 of them, they were close calls, but one was into Zare's Delicatessen. There were no injuries, but damage to the storefront. A second into Cafe Raj. Again, damage to the storefront, but no injuries. Very close calls for people that were enjoying their lunches there. And the third was into the same building as Cafe Raj, a car. In that case, as I understand it, there may have been a medical condition affecting the driver, and it rolled across the street in kind of a glancing blow to the side of the building. In that case, the person who was in the vehicle was evaluated I believe, was transported for evaluation, not related to the collision, but to as a possible contributing factor.
Please.
Was that, you say it was a glancing blow, was that in the driveway next to the building, or did they actually cross the sidewalk outside of the driveway area?
For that particular incident, I'm getting this secondhand. I think it went across the sidewalk, but I'm not positive about that. The other 2, I was there, and I wasn't there for the incident, but I was called in to look at the building, and those were people parking their vehicle, and they just confused the brake and the gas pedal and went up over the curb into the building.
And so did they were in the act of pulling into this space?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay.
Other questions? Okay.
Well, I guess, I mean, the letters talked about bollards. I suppose we can talk about that some other time. That's probably doesn't come under this agenda item, but I think it would be good to at least do diligence on the request, given what's happened.
Right. We can agendize that more fully at a future meeting, sure.
Other comments? All right, 3-2, shared mobility data.
So the first graph shows trends in gig. This is the AAA-sponsored car share arrangement, car rental arrangement, I guess. In June, the number of members within this, that reside in the city of Albany declined a little bit, down 8%. And trips, as I understand, beginning or ending in Albany declined as well, down 12%. And keep in mind with this in particular, I think there's an assumption there's a seasonal pattern that has to do with University Village and students that they're residing there.
Sure.
And then this is the trend line for electric scooters, and there's a report of 120 trips in Albany, down a little bit from 158 in May.
Questions?
The 6 to 7 gigs in town on average, I'm just looking at the application now, which is obviously just a moment in time, but I've often seen just 3 in my neighborhood, which is, a few blocks of Albany, and right now I see maybe 12 to 18 in Albany. So I don't know how they come up with that number, but it seems like there's more than those around, so I don't know. Okay.
We take the data that we get and pass it on. Right, I understand if you look at your app, it's, I don't know if some of the other types of share, like an Airbnb, they sometimes exaggerate the number of rentals that might be, if you put in a city name, they always put 300 rentals are available. It doesn't matter where you are. So I don't know if there's maybe a little of exaggeration on their screen. I don't know.
Well, no, I mean, the vehicles are there. If you go there, it'd be very bad for them if they exaggerated on the app, because then you'd show up and there'd be no car. So.
Yeah, there's 3 regularly on my block. I'm right on the Kensington border, so I don't know if gig is not allowed in Kensington, but they're 3 regularly there.
Yeah, the area doesn't include Kensington.
Okay.
So, I mean, I've noticed there frequently a concentration of them just on the south side of Cerrito Creek, which is the borders. I think, there's people in El Cerrito that are using them and parking them as far north as they can. But if you've often got 3 in your neighborhood and I have 3 in mine, then
6 right there.
it's right there. So it's interesting because, I mean, we did our advantage to indicate there's more if there's more. So.
Anecdotally, there was one on my block last week that got a ticket during the street sweeping hours, which we figured would happen.
Interesting. Any other questions or comments on the chairman?
So I noticed this week a Lyft electric bike locked to a sign along the Greenway. Do we have any information about Lyft and e-bikes? Nope.
I haven't heard anything. Justin is away this week. He may have heard something and he didn't pass it on to me.
I have a little information to share on that. They did deploy them in Oakland. So that's just a bike that has migrated over from Oakland. They're supposed to be working with Emeryville and Berkeley to figure out a launch there, but people ride the bikes where they ride the bikes at the moment. I think my concern was relative to your observation that it was locked to the stop sign at Masonic and Dartmouth. Probably not the optimal place to lock a bike. So if we see them popping up in Albany routinely, we might want to talk about whether we want to establish any operating protocol. And since we have no contract with Lyft right now, I'm not entirely sure, Jeff, what happened, but just it might be something worth consideration if you see it being something that happens a lot.
Right.
One issue is not, one bike is not worth spending a lot of time on that. We'll see.
We'd certainly be happy to report it, and if they don't respond promptly, then maybe more substantive regulations would be appropriate. We haven't had that problem with the regular line bikes when they were rolling out last year, I guess it was. There were a few incidents of it blocking the sidewalk, but it wasn't a big deal.
Okay.
Robert?
Yes.
So I've been seeing the lift or bay wheel bikes around and around Albany and some in strange places. My favorite was actually outside of Albany this morning. I was driving on Grizzly Peak, and in the midst of a curve that was basically inaccessible for pedestrians, there was an abandoned electric lift bike, and I hope the person walked away safely. The bike looked fine, but it was in an odd space.
Was it locked to anything?
I really don't think so, no.
All right. Any other comments? Okay, moving on to the consent calendar. There's only one item on consent, which are the minutes from the last meeting. Any member of the public who wishes to speak on an item on consent can come up and do so now, or if there's any member of the commission that wants to discuss the item, we can also do that, or we can just take a motion on the consent calendar altogether.
I have a couple suggested corrections on the minutes.
Okay.
On 3-2, it says advise the gig membership increased by 363 in April. I believe that it should be to 363. I mean, it'd be great if it increased by 363, but I don't think it did, looking at the chart. And in 5.3, I believe what I said was that all the truncated dome mats in the project should be high friction, whereas the minutes say just the eastern mat on the southern crossing of 8th Street. So while that is the only mat where people who are biking would be required to be turning across the mat to follow the path, they could be turning across the mat on the other side to make a turn on to 8th Street, say going southbound.
Okay. Any other comments?
I'll move approval of the minutes with the corrections.
I'll second.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, the consent calendar passes.
I need to abstain.
Great, thank you. Sorry about that.
No problem.
On to the discussion items. So we do have some members of the public here. If I can get a show of hands, how many are here for the North Albany traffic calming? And then how many here are for the Albany High School? 2. I think we're going to spend a decent amount of time, I would assume, on pavement. So I would propose that we move, maybe move 5.3 up to the top.
Can you make room for press leader to make a presentation?
No comment for me. I think I have to leave for that one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I live right,
Yes.
like right there, so.
Yeah. Is that okay with staff?
Hmm?
Okay.
But
All right,
whatever the
see you later.
would like.
Yeah.
Just give us a second to.
Yeah, sorry about that. I think
No
it's.
problem. Rosalita Diaz is a graduate student working in our office and did this analysis and would like to present it to you this evening.
I have an extra one. We can make it available to the public.
Does anyone from the public need a copy? We have one copy out there, I think, left. It's also the same presentation that'll be on the screen.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to be presenting the traffic count data of North Albany, and this data is from 2014 and 2019. This data was collected in order to address traffic calming measures that might be put in place because of the El Cerrito Plaza apartments. So here's a little bit of background. So between 2014 and 2019, the Traffic and Safety Commission started discussing traffic calming measures in the residential streets adjacent to El Cerrito Plaza. These streets include Keynes, Stanage, Cornell, Talbot, Evelyn, and Brighton. Some of the ideas at the time were considering street closures, drop-off zones, school drop-off zones, high visibility crosswalks, signage, and cycle tracks. While some of these are still under consideration, street closures weren't a viable option because the general plan does not allow them. However, the city was able to install speed humps and no truck signage by the end of 2016.
Excuse me.
Yes.
On the third bullet,
Yes.
is it true that the general plan does not allow them or did not allow them?
Do you know if
I
it was?
think it did at that time did not allow.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so in February 2015, there was a conceptual plan that was approved, and up here I do have that plan outlined. This includes the 11 speed humps, 2 mini traffic circles on Brighton, high visibility crosswalks, additional 4-way stop signs, as well as red curbs at intersections for better visibility, and a right turning lane at Brighton and San Pablo. So this was approved then. However, as of now, only the speed humps have been installed. So the September 2014 traffic counts are on these 5 blocks, 400 Keynes, 400 Cornell, 400 Talbot, 400 Evelyn, and 1200 Brighton. Well, the 2019 counts are on the same blocks, except instead of 1200 Brighton, it was taken at 1100 Brighton. Well, these weren't all taken on the same months, they were during the school year term. So here I have the comparison of the 2014 and 2019 traffic counts at 400 Keynes. As you can see here, speeds decreased after the speed humps were implemented, but average daily volume on the weekdays increased. The southbound and northbound traffic stayed about the same, while the percent of vehicles going above 31 miles per hour slightly increased. We do not know why the average daily volume increased, but it's possible this has something to do with the new grocery store options available, such as Sprouts and Whole Foods. 400 Cornell showed speeds decreased and average daily volume decreased as well. The traffic in both directions stayed about the same with a slight change, and there was 0% of vehicles going above 31 miles per hour. 400 Talbot also showed a decrease in speeds and average daily volume. And since this is a one-way street, only southbound traffic was taken into consideration, which also showed little to no change. .400 Evelyn also showed that speeds and average daily volume decreased. And again, as a one-way street, we only looked at northbound traffic, which stayed about the same, and the percent of vehicles going above 31 miles per hour decreased to 0%. Lastly, 1100, 1200 Brighton. Like I mentioned, in 2014, the counts were taken at 1100 block, and in 2019, they were taken at the 1200 block of Brighton. While the speed stayed the same, the weekday average daily volume increased. However, we cannot say for sure if this is because there was more volume on 1100 Brighton or if it's just a different amount on the 1200 block at Brighton. So that's the only discrepancy there, but all the other information stayed about the same. I also wanted to include some collision data in the North Albany area. Last month, I presented broader collision data in the whole city of Albany, reflecting pedestrian and bicyclist collisions. These 5 collisions occurred in the North Albany area, and none of them included a speed as the reason for the accident. So these were due to operator error, whether that was a bicyclist, pedestrian, or vehicle. There were 2 repeat accidents, however, at Brighton and Keynes in 2015 and 2017. So overall, we can see that speeds did decrease in 4 out of the 5 streets studied, while the speeds on Brighton remained about the same. The weekday average daily volume in 3 out of 5 streets decreased, while Keynes and Brighton increased. Again, like I mentioned, Keynes might be due to more grocery store options south of the city, while Brighton, it may differ depending on the blocks of Brighton, since in 2014, the counts were taken at 1,100 Brighton, while the 2019 counts were taken at 1,200 Brighton. Overall, the speed humps are an efficient way at decreasing speeds on the streets adjacent to El Cerrito Plaza, but I think the collision data does merit further traffic calming measures on Brighton because the collisions did occur at those intersections.
Thank you, Gracie. Just in closing, I want to point out that our intent this evening was mostly to share with you and the public the data. We realize that this might provoke a substantive discussion about the status of the North Albany traffic calming project, and because of you have a full agenda tonight, we didn't want to get into that detail. And importantly, we didn't send out a postcard as we might normally do for that broader discussion to people in the neighborhood. This was basically, again, sharing the information that we've collected the last few months, and if you have questions about that data or some ideas that you would like us to explore further and bring back to you, we'd be happy to do that. But just wanted to caution you that this wasn't agendized or noticed to the neighborhood as a discussion of the project.
Thank you. I'll turn it back to the commission for questions. And those members of the public that do want to speak, we'll allow you to provide public comment after the commissioner's questions. If you can, fill out a speaker card. They're right at the back table, and then we can call your name to come up. So back to the commission for questions.
When you were talking about the 400 block of Keynes, you noted the weekly average daily volume increase, and you said something quickly about that might be attributable to a change in stores, grocery stores that are available. How would you think an increase in traffic in that area adjacent to a shopping center would be indicative of shoppers going to a different shopping center?
I think it's more the context of the overall pattern that we're seeing. We're not surprised to see speeds improve due to the installation of speed humps. We were surprised to see a decrease in the volumes, and so we're speculating that somehow the mix in grocery stores makes Trader Joe's less popular, and so there's a different pattern emerging in how people are using the 4 streets. It's completely conjecture in that, we haven't done interviews of people, and other than just kind of kicking around the office, we haven't talked to a lot of people in the community. We may get feedback this evening that would help us understand the dynamics of what's going on there.
Thank you.
Other questions from the commission? I had a question. Did we have project goals, or are there standards that we wanted to meet that the city has for the reduction in speed on these? These are collector streets. I don't know if they all are or not. Is it speed limit? Is it city average, 85th percentile?
We didn't have a target. We haven't identified, to my knowledge, we haven't identified a target a target speed that we'd like the streets to get to. Obviously, it's good to see that most people are going the speed limit. I think that's if I remember correctly, on the 4 streets, everybody is pretty close or a little bit under, in this case, to the speed limit. So that's good. Yeah. But we didn't. I don't think we had a numeric target at that time.
The speed that we look at when we measure speed on a street where there may be a request for traffic calming, the threshold is 28. miles per hour on the 85th percentile? Is that correct?
Yeah, it's kind of a gray area, but in that range, I think your guidelines were, was it either 20 or 29 miles an hour, assuming a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit.
Right.
The sort of industry rule of thumb is it's 5 miles over the speed limit. We've reduced that a little bit just because we never seem to we got close but never got to that threshold on a lot of streets.
Okay, please.
If the average, or if the 85th percentile is less than 20 miles an hour, can we lower the speed limit on the street to 20 miles an hour?
I'd have to look at that, what the vehicle code says about that.
Does California allow that?
Well,
Didn't Berkeley look at this? Maybe not.
I know it applies on arterial streets. I'm trying to remember with respect to neighborhood streets, the default is always 25 miles an hour, but it's possible we could. I don't know.
I'm not sure that would be
Double
worth it
check.
in these cases, but
You're already getting the relatively low speed,
yeah.
which is good.
I mean, normally it's either a school zone or there's a design reason, visibility reason that you want to reduce the speeds below 25. We'll take a look at that.
Yeah, school zones, there's very explicit criteria that allow you to reduce to 15 or 20 miles an hour by council action or by an engineering study. But yeah.
the 400 blocks of Keynes it requires some negotiation, so that might be a place to think about it.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, let's open up to public comment. Staff can read out the names, or I can read them out, whatever. I think you guys have the card, so.
I have two right now, Kathy Matson and Eleanor Moses.
Kathy Madison. I live at 415 Cornell. And thanks for this new data. I'm still feeling like Cornell, regardless of the fact there's fewer cars in this particular count, is still absorbing a lot of the southbound traffic out of the plaza. And I'd like to see if there's some way that the neighborhood, people from the neighborhood could work with Public Works to maybe, get some of these improvements going. I really would like to see better sidewalks at Brighton. I'd like to see a traffic, no parking curbing. There's currently a car parked right on the corner of Brighton and Cornell, like right to the edge, which makes it really difficult to see cars, and that car is parked there most of the time, just so people can see better. Also, I know the traffic has slowed according to this data, but there's still that concept that cars speed up and slow down at the speed bump, even on a short street like Cornell. So I think we need to post even slower signs. And I'd like some signs up that show that people are entering a neighborhood, that this is where it's a high-density neighborhood with a lot of foot traffic, and people backing out of their apartment buildings. So while it's encouraging to see the volume of the cars have not picked up, there's still a lot of safety issues and concerns that were intended to be addressed like 5 years ago. And I'd like to know how we can get some of these projects moved ahead and how to prioritize them. And if we have to revisit the plan that was, presented, several years ago. So that would be my concern is, it's been 5 years. There hasn't been anything other than the speed bumps and the no truck signs. How can we get this, move this forward? So, thank you.
Thank you.
After Eleanor will be Stuart Gooderman.
Good evening. My name is Eleanor Moses, and I'm an Albany resident, and I'd like to thank the staff for facilitating the counts. And we had sent a question to Jeff a few weeks ago and just wanted to reiterate that question. Our North Albany Neighborhood Association, we were curious if the counts that you took in 2019 were taken in the same months and the same days of the week as the counts that were taken in 2014. And we also are curious to hear what the plan is, just piggybacking on the comments that were just made a few minutes ago about the plan being approved, I believe, back in 2015. The larger context is that the North Albany residents brought this issue to the attention of the city back in 2000, and we had votes from the city council, I think at least 2 times, maybe 3 times, to move forward with street closure because the configuration at the plaza is very unusual to have commercial traffic flowing into a residential area. And our larger concern is the livability of the neighborhood. We are a high-density area. We have people that walk in that area. There's a lot of traffic to the middle school, and we'll have hopefully more and more people that are out walking and biking. And the plan that was put in place back in 2015 was to create an environment that's more conducive to pedestrian and cyclist and just a safe neighborhood. And we would like you to get to work on that. So we'd like to hear what the time frame is and if there are plans to continue studying the traffic flow. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening, Stu Gooderman at 417 Evelyn Avenue. I have 2 questions. One was just brought up recently about what the goal of the reduction in car speed is considered significant. The average amount of a reduction in speed was about 3 to 4 miles per hour. Is that considered significant, or is that essentially within experimental error, so therefore there was no real change in the speed? I don't think anybody here has an idea of whether that is a significant change in the speed of cars going down those blocks. The other thing is, does anybody know what the occupation amounts are at the new buildings in the plaza? Is the structures completely rented out? They still have the signs up there that they're looking for rentals. So is it only 50% occupied? Is it 25% occupied? Does anybody know what that is? My understanding, the rentals there are a little bit on the high side, so I question how dense so far that the buildings are. Because if it's only 25% occupied and it's going to go up to, say, 100%, we're going to see a lot more traffic in that area. So, and I don't know how much it's occupied. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other speaker cards?
Yes. Ellen Hershey.
Ellen Hershey, Albany resident. Thank you for the attention to the traffic counts. Just a couple of comments. The neighbors' concern about traffic through our residential streets into the plaza actually predates the condominium development. As Eleanor indicated, it goes way back and has intensified. It actually intensified after Trader Joe's was put in. And also the farmers market that's held on that south side of the plaza on Saturdays just produces a steady stream of cars in and out along those streets. So I just wanted to say a couple of things that, in my personal observations living in that part of Albany, there's quite a bit of variability in the traffic that I observe going in and out of the plaza, just depending on what time of day it is, whether it's the weekend, whether it's work hours or off work hours, Saturdays being the worst. The second is I wanted to point out that that neighborhood between Brighton and the plaza, I believe, was identified in the last general plan as an area for future high-density development in Albany. So we need to be thinking not only about the current traffic conditions, but about the fact that we're expecting that to become a high-density neighborhood to help meet Albany's residential housing needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have no other speaker cards.
Is there anyone else that didn't submit a speaker card that wants to come up and speak on this item? Okay. We'll bring it back to the commission for comments.
We could respond to a couple of the.
Please, Abby. Yes, please, come up.
If you could tolerate just one more comment for me. You know, it's been in the plan for a long time to put crosswalks in along Brighton. And if you could move forward even with that aspect of it, I think it would really be helpful, because I drive down Brighton, I see mothers and kids, you know, waiting to try to cross, and there aren't even crosswalks on that street, which of course also has middle school and high school kids on it during school days. Thank you.
Thank you.
There were a
Want to
couple,
respond? That'd be great.
couple questions that came up that we'd like to try to respond to. First, with respect to days of the week, we collect the data for a full week. And we can divide that, we can analyze the data in a lot of different ways. If the commission is interested, or the public would like to see that, I'd be happy to make an appointment with people and go through it in detail. The months are a little bit different.
Yes, so the data presented today was just focused on weekdays, but there were different months. For September, the counts were, in 2014, all the counts were taken in the month of September, and the counts I discussed were weekdays at all hours. For the 2019 counts, they varied. In February, it was just Talbot. In March, it was Cornell, Keynes, and Brighton. And in May, it was Evelyn. But this was also during the school year, but they were different months than in 2014.
And our general approach to this is to pick a week where there's normal weather conditions, normal school conditions, so on and so forth. So they should be relatively comparable. With respect to the question of whether we've done a statistical analysis, if there's a significant difference in these, we haven't yet. What we're reporting are the averages. If that's something that, again, if members of the public or the commission is interested in a more in-depth statistical analysis, we can do that for you. And with the final question, I believe, was the question whether we have any information on the occupancy of the new apartment complex in the corner of El Cerrito Plaza, and we don't. We know that the construction is completed and that there are people in there, but the number of people, the number of units occupied, we don't have that information.
Can you speak to the funding of the Phase 2 project, the Brighton traffic calming, and where that all stands?
It's a project that's in our capital improvement plan. It is the capital improvement plan is a document that Public Works is working on and refreshing for planning to bring back to the City Council this fall, and that can be one of the many variables of projects that can be aligned with available funding, either move it ahead or behind other projects.
Great. And I think there was a comment from the public about cars parking right at the corner of Brighton and Cornell, and I think that's one of the improvements in the traffic calming project.
That is, and we also have separately dealt with that on a case-by-case basis, and we've adopted, a few years ago, you adopted a policy where we can implement red curbs at intersections for this very reason, for safety reasons, and we will take a look at that sooner rather than later as a separate, more urgent safety consideration.
Thank you. Comments from the commission?
Just that one of the two Brighton collisions, the one in February 2017, was a backing out into a backing into a pedestrian. So that might align with that issue.
Great.
I was just going to comment on the speed reductions, and while it's not a statistical analysis, the 85th percentile speeds dropping by 3 to almost 5 miles an hour as a traffic engineer, that's pretty dramatic. We've looked at other studies that showed negligible changes, so you wouldn't expect to see 85th percentile speeds having a margin of error of that magnitude. So that is a definite shift in speed behavior, especially given that it's a week's worth of data, so you're not just catching a small number. It's a pretty good sample size.
Other comments?
I look forward to helping move the whole project along when you need us to. It sounds like it's up to the city council to prioritize funding for that at this point.
I think that would be part of it. Certainly, it is to set priorities for a lot of projects. The other thing would be to take a fresh look at the project. Since the public discussion of that project, I've gotten lots of feedback that people aren't that excited about the mini circles, and there might need to be another round of public discussion about the elements of the project before we start the final design and construction of something.
And I agree with Ken. Yeah, the faster we can move forward with additional traffic calming to make the area safer, reduce some of the incidents that have occurred, reduce traffic volumes would be great. Any other comments? All right. Who's here for street paving? Not interested in street paving, huh?
Are you going to bring Preston back in?
You are here for street paving. I'm just trying to, I'm anticipating that the discussion for, and the presentation for paving is going to be, could be lengthy. I know we have some other.
Not if you don't let Preston back in the room. I'm sorry. Somewhat.
And again, are there people who want to comment on the Albany High School curbside management? I saw there was 2, 3, 4. If it's okay with staff and the commission, maybe we could take the Albany High School item next. So that's 5-2 proposed, and then we will take the pavement management program after that. So 5-2 proposed curbside management at Albany High School for Ocean View Elementary student relocation. Turn it over to staff.
So to refresh your memory, this is the school district is in the process of rejuvenating many of their facilities, and as part of that, they are going to be rebuilding Ocean View School and relocating students who would normally attend Ocean View in a variety of different facilities. What we're looking at this evening is how to accommodate pickup and drop off for 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders who will be moving to the classrooms that will be placed as part or within the footprint of the Albany High School campus. And this would be happening sometime in the 2019-2020 school year. We're expecting 260 students to be relocated in the combination of new portables and the new building that's currently under construction. And as with other projects, other school relocation projects, the city's role in the project is really quite limited to how it interfaces with the city streets. So, and in particular, how, for the Traffic and Safety Commission, how the traffic flow and parking and loading and pickup and drop off. So we've asked the school district to prepare a proposal for your consideration this evening. And based on your feedback, staff would go ahead and prepare an encroachment permit so that the district's contractor can execute, it can implement a curb painting program to allow for this, the change in pickup and drop off. Juan, would you like to take it over from here? If you want to summarize, or if you'd like me to do it either way, I don't want to.
Good evening, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and for your consideration. My name is Juan Barroso. I'm the district's project manager on the bond projects. And yes, the whole reason we're here is related to the projects, building new schools, improving the schools related to the bond program. So this is one of the issues we're going to have to deal with. So essentially what the district is proposing is to look at ways to improve drop-off and pickup for the elementary students that are going to be relocated to the high school on a temporary basis. So this is looking at that scenario. The district did hold 2 neighborhood meetings on the topic, and I think the superintendent at the time said 1 meeting, a group of neighbors showed up, 2nd meeting, a different group of neighbors showed up. So they did get some comments and some ideas, which we tried to incorporate the best we could into this plan. Additionally, this item was discussed in a board meeting. Again, another opportunity for public comment. So I believe the district did make every effort they could to engage with the neighborhood and solicit comments. So I'm going to summarize the components of the plan we're proposing. Better this way. So I try to show this in a simple way. The areas that are indicated in the blue dashed line are existing white curb, pickup drop-off. In some cases, the signs are not correct or maybe not facing in the right direction. Along the bottom down here, although it's a white curb, it has a 2-hour sign, so we're going to fix that and make everything 3-minute parking. So those are the areas in blue. That's existing drop-off zones. We're just fixing the signs. In essence. The areas shown in the bright green are the 2 sections that we're proposing to change to a white curb, again with 3-minute parking signs. The other change that we're showing here for everyone's information is we're going to be relocating 20 bike racks kind of from this area here to down there to be able to clear the fire lane. So that's going to function as a temporary fire lane. We have reviewed this plan with the fire chief. He also gave us some comments, and we believe we have his support for this plan. You'll see in blue is the new building that's under construction now. That's scheduled to be complete end of this year, January timeframe. Again, weather's going to have a factor on that. And then the 3 boxes in yellow indicate portable classrooms that we're going to begin placing in about November. The intent is to move the students over the winter break so that they can start school at this site in January. So that's the plan. And after the Ocean View School is complete, which is expected to be early summer of 2021, then our team is going to move to the reconstruction of the Marin School. And we go through the same scenario with a different student population. So those students would also move into these temporary classrooms while their school is rebuilt. And then once we're done, about 4 years from now, it all kind of goes back to the way it is today. So I'd be happy to take questions. And also, I'd like to introduce Dr. Frank Wells, who is the new superintendent for the Albany Unified School District. Took over this Herculean job here in Albany on July 1st, and we're working closely with him. And he's also here in case there are questions directed for the district. So we'd be happy to take questions.
Questions from the commission?
Yeah, and the staff memo from city staff had the start times for 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, the early bird end time for 3rd grade, and the start and end times for the high school students, but it didn't have the end time for 4th and 5th grade.
I can give you that.
Okay, great, thanks.
3:05.
I thought I sent the summary to you guys.
Except on Wednesday.
Except on Wednesday when it's 1:40.
Or under evaluations or on, yeah, it's.
And as I got into it, it's pretty complicated with kids come and go and stuff, so.
Sure.
I mean, I guess my goal was to make sure that that time isn't the same time as the high school.
Right.
And
So-
on any day.
Again, give me your question so I can answer it.
The end time for 4th and 5th grade.
3:05. The high school is 3:32, 3:36. So it's about 30 minutes apart.
And 2:42. But it
And then
says,
on Wednesdays, it's different.
okay,
4th and 5th get out at 1:40.
okay,
High school gets out at 2:42.
okay, great, thank you.
So in the PM, there's at least a 30-minute gap between elementary and high school.
Right.
And in the morning, looks like
Morning's
it's
about 20 minutes.
Yeah. Okay.
So my question isn't related to start times, but this side will be at the annex. Will the 1st and 2nd graders be having the same start times as the existing start times? I guess my concern is you may have parents that need to make.
The middle school, you mean? Or
Well, the 1st and 2nd graders that will be at the annex, will you be having start times as at the same time as this for the early bird library? So my concern is, and I've expressed this at a school board event, is you'll have parents potentially making 2 drop-offs at the same 2 sites that are 2 blocks in a congested area already, and I'll just express my concern again that even having a 5-minute delay at one side or the other may help alleviate that situation.
I appreciate that comment, and we'll discuss it with the superintendent. Thank you.
Other questions from the commission?
So you answered a lot of our questions in the memo, or the school district did, and thank you for that. That was very helpful. One of those questions was about the flow of students, parents, whatever. How will, in terms of pickup and drop off and just general flow and access, how will the portion of the site being used for elementary students be connected or disconnected from the rest of the site? For example, for access to Thousand Oaks, for access to Key Route.
So I appreciate the question. We discussed that at length with both school principals, and the approach that we're taking is to actually, as much as possible, try to integrate the student populations. So one idea was, hey, should we fence them off? Kind of makes sense in some ways. You have little kids and bigger kids. In the end, I think the decision was, let's integrate the populations, and let's let the older kids be role models to the younger kids so that they're not afraid of each other. So there's no physical separation of the 2 populations. Certainly, the elementary students are going to have more access sort of in this region of the campus, but it's not intended to be kind of a hard separation.
Okay. So all of the pickup and drop-off locations could potentially serve for both populations?
They could.
Keeping in mind that parents won't probably, well, I guess that's another question. There's some talk of supervision of elementary students waiting for pickup. I'm presuming that would take place on Portland?
I'm not sure that we have figured out in detail where those folks are going to be, but in our discussions, there is going to be staff assigned, particularly at the very beginning of the year, to make sure that the flow is working, educate the parents, but there will be a presence there to assist with that.
Okay.
And then one more question. So there won't be any fencing or anything around the portables? It would be completely open? Okay.
Other questions? Seeing none, let's open it up to the public for comments.
I have one speaker card from Norma and I'm not sure I'm going to pronounce your last name correctly, so I'll just say Norma. Let you pronounce your name.
Norma Edwer-Boama. I've been a resident over 50 years here, so.
Could you raise the microphone up a little bit, ma'am? Thank you.
My comments, I think, should have come earlier. They are all from people standing in the pool the other day with a lot of concern, especially those, those of us who are 70s, 80s, and 90s that are in that pool, and they're having concern with the more traffic and how it won't be controlled, they feel, because it isn't controlled now. Some of them have almost been hit trying to get across Portland. And so there were a lot of comments, and I'll give you those. One thing was, why don't they choose one of the 3 grades, have them dropped off on Thousand Oaks, whereas the other 2 grades could be on Portland, and it wouldn't be quite so much traffic and wouldn't be so much parking problems. Because there's a Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9:30, physical therapy innovations comes in, and a lot of them need parking, and they need handicap parking. So that was one suggestion. Another one, they're concerned about Pomona and Ramona because they're so narrow already. And are those parents going to be going both ways? You can't hardly get through going both ways on either of those streets, much less. And then they're concerned that a parent will drop them off on the south side of Portland and the kids will run across. And that's why some of them said, well, there needs to be 1, if not 2, crossing guards there through the whole time period. Drop-off going, this suggestion was saying, only if you're coming from at least Carmel down Portland, can you turn in the little indentation, drop off your child, and go straight on to Key Route. Because otherwise, if they're turning around, you see them now flipping a U and going back up Portland. You see them going every which way. And that really needs control. The other question that somebody said, has this been discussed with PTI? Does anybody know? Has PTI?
PDI stands for?
It's Physical Therapy Innovations.
Thank you.
9:30 to 12, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. They have as many as 50 people in that pool. It's not only physical therapy, it's also the social place. That's why there's so many pay the $90 a monthly, go in there 3 times there. And that's, okay, my times. Oh, can I just say one more thing is, it's been suggested that you put back 3 parking spaces on the south side of Portland between Key Route and the first driveway that goes in. There has been 3 when we moved there. There were 2, and then they went back to 3, and now there are 2. So that would add another parking space that would be available, because that's going to be a real problem.
Ma'am, I have a question for you. You referred to the little turn-in, which is a red curbed area at the plaza there at the end of Pomona, I believe?
Yes.
Yeah. So do you see that used as a drop-off spot often?
Yes. High school kids, yes. Handicapped people, yes. So it is used.
Thank you.
As I say, I've lived there 40 years, so I see everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I had one question also. The physical therapy class you're talking about, are those attendees dropped off, or do they drive?
Which classes? Which classes are you referring to?
Oh, at the PDI, all of them. The class you said you had 50 people in the pool at a time.
There's Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 8 o'clock. There is an adult class that has 20 to 25 people.
Mm-hmm.
and almost all of them drive.
Okay.
Park. Tuesday, Thursday at 9 o'clock, there's a new Zumba class, and there's about 25 people in that one. And then at 10 o'clock, there's as many as 35 to 40 in a class. So the parking is.
Okay. But there's not heavy passenger drop-off, like nothing
Not
with
for
special
those
needs patients or anything like that? Okay.
Once in a while, there's the vans, the handicap vans will bring people. That's Monday, Wednesday, Friday usually.
Okay. Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there other public comment on this?
Yes, I have a speaker card from Ellen Hershey.
I thought there was at least one more hand. Yeah.
Cheers.
I just had a comment, and it's based on my experience as a close neighbor to Albany Middle School and observing parental driving behavior at drop-off and pickup time. And my observation is that the drop-off and pickup zones, simply the no parking in those zones during drop-off and pickup times simply is not being enforced at all. And one day when I was observing, I noted, for example, 2 cars in different zones near Albany Middle School that were parked there all day, right in the middle of the drop-off pickup zone for the whole time. And I live right across the street from the red zone that is the fire safety area in front of Albany Middle School. And for years, we couldn't get people to stop parking there or using it as a drop-off pickup zone until finally one person responsible for building maintenance at Albany, in Albany School District, posted huge signs that said, no school drop-off pickup in this area, gigantic signs. Those really helped. They cut the problem by 80 to 90%. So I noticed the question was asked from a previous meeting about the red zone, for example, along Portland by the pool, which is supposed to be a fire safety red zone. And the fire chief says, no, nobody can drop off, pick up there. I see people dropping off and picking up and parking there all the time, every day, but there's no huge sign explaining to people that's a fire safety zone. So I would encourage signage. I see the plan is that school personnel will be ensuring orderly drop-off and pickup. Will they be deputized to hand out parking tickets when they come to the drop-off pickup zone and find cars just plain parked there? Or what is the process for getting some preventive cooperation from Albany Police? Because I think handing out a few parking tickets, the word would spread quickly that that's not a place to park. Thanks.
Thank you.
I think we have one more speaker.
Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Kim Kitano, 1325 Thousand Oaks. We live right across the street from the high school and Memorial Park. So what we experience a lot of high school drop-offs, double parking, backing up beyond our driveway and beyond. So my concern is that with the proposed loading area on Thousand Oaks, first, number one, is this a gentleman back here? It doesn't interfere with the crosswalk, number one. Is that correct? How far up? It says 76 feet, but how far away is it from the crosswalk?
If we could have the question asked or finish your comment, and then we can have staff come back up and respond.
Okay, so I just want to.
We're on record, so people watch on TV and listen.
So I just want to make sure that it's significant away from the crosswalk that's there on Thousand Oaks, at Pomona, that crosswalk. The second thing that I'm concerned about, to tag on to the previous spokesperson, is that there will be a person throughout the duration of this project who will be monitoring and overseeing the safety of what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other comments from the public? Okay, we'll bring it back to the commission for comment. And I think also if we can get staff to maybe respond to some of the comments about staffing, and then the issue of the crosswalk or the distance of the loading zone to the crosswalk at Pomona on Thousand Oaks, that would be useful.
I can respond to the crosswalk. Well, I'm having trouble getting on the internet, so I can't get exactly what that distance would be right now. But what I can say is that we will confirm that there is adequate distance between the drop-off zone and the crosswalk, so vehicles in the drop-off zone don't affect the visibility of the crosswalk. We'll make sure that's okay.
Okay, thank you.
And with respect to the staffing of the area, I think that's a school district question to have addressed.
Does the school district have a response to that? If you could come up to the mic so we can get you on camera and TV.
Good evening. We plan on having adequate personnel. We're trying to figure out what might be appropriate numbers to help supervise that area to increase the safety. So personnel will be present on a regular basis.
Thanks.
I had some other questions, actually,
Yeah.
for you, or, well, I don't know, for one of you. But first, I want to say, I got to make a choice. No wonder you're a superintendent. Get it done. Welcome, by the way. It's nice to meet you, such as this allows. Do you know, will there be crossing guards, and if so, where?
We're still contemplating on the number of crossing guards that may be needed and the funding for that. And so that's still under discussion right now.
Okay, but there's some thought of, is the discussion between deciding between 1 and 2, or 0 and 2, 0 and 1? Is 0 on the table?
Well, there's nothing off the table. Other than that, safety is our priority, and we are going to have staff out and about with having adequate supervision of helping make sure kids cross the street. It won't always be crossing guard. It may be staff, primarily our administrators.
Okay.
So.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we addressed everything from the public comments. Back to the commission for question or comment. Go ahead, Amy. Please.
I think just for the district staff, if you want to add to your long list of things to do in this coming year, is to have the pool schedule synced with the school schedule, so that you're not having classes starting at the same time as the class that that Norma talked about. That would be good. I think if there was a lag of at least 15 minutes, you would probably avoid a lot of congestion. So.
Okay. I had one other question. How does the amount of space that's allocated here compare to the amount of available space for drop-off at Ocean View currently? I know it's going to be different dynamics, of course, but I don't know if it's the same, less, more.
So just to understand your question, you're asking how does the drop-off zone here, the quantity of it?
Right, the amount of space allocated for drop-off zone here compared to
I believe Ocean View has a little bit more. Ocean View has pretty limited drop-off zone as well, because it's very tight.
Right.
You know, there's none on one side. It's just that small frontage. So this is probably pretty close to that.
Okay.
For about half the population that gets dropped off at Ocean View. So I don't see this being worse than what's experienced at Ocean View.
Okay, thank you. Okay, comments from the commission? Who wants to start?
I'll
Reed.
just say that I think that in terms of what's before us to approve the encroachment permit, the markings all seem to be in appropriate locations. As Jeff pointed out, making sure that there's clearance between the end of the drop-off zone and the crosswalk, that's great. I think that what's going to make the difference between success and not is the staffing plan. And trying to communicate clearly to parents, what's expected of them before they show up and encounter a chaotic situation. If everyone knows in advance and the staff kind of holds them to it, that will make a big difference.
I agree.
I have
Comments? Ken?
So something I think we addressed last time this came up when we talked about it ourselves several months ago was, at least in Google Street View, there's a handicapped space sign that was missing. I don't know if that's been dealt with at just to the east of Pomona on the park side, on the north side of the street. I've long watched the red zone / drop-up zone at the pool with some consternation. It's basically used as a pickup drop-off and waiting zone for parents. And I don't see anything that would change that if the fire chief is saying that we need to leave that open for access. This plan is not addressing that. My own personal concern is that if we leave a red zone in a place that's used as a pickup and drop-off zone, then we allow people to assume that all red zones are pickup and drop-off zones, which if you visit Solano on a busy Friday or Saturday evening, it's true. But that's a bigger fish to fry. So I'm disappointed that we couldn't just arbitrarily make it yellow because we've been instructed that it needs to stay open. So I'm not sure what we can do to address that. So the signs at other schools are pretty specific about the driver staying with the car. Not that that gets
No, they don't.
enforced. So I'm assuming these signs are going to be similar. I presume we can ask for enforcement. There's a long-standing usage here for pickup and drop-off for the pool using the red zone.
So you're suggesting that it be made a pickup and drop-off zone or be enforced as a red zone or either one?
Due to the advice of the fire department, I don't think I'm recommending that we make it a designated pickup and drop-off zone. That sounds unworkable.
So enforce it as a red zone?
To enforce, no. Well, and so I think that leaves us with the alternative of enforcing it as a red zone.
Yeah.
Or finding a treatment that would finding a treatment that would reinforce it as a no-go area for vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
You'll also note that the bike racks in the plan are being moved to just below the lowest yellow box. And the access to those bike racks is actually only currently, from the street anyway, is only at the crosswalk located just below that location along the street. That's actually kind of a crunch zone because, and it shows pretty well in Street View, but it sounds like you don't have internet access. There is a fire hydrant located in the ADA street ramp, and there's signage and a light pole along the narrow sidewalk immediately east of that. So pedestrians coming to or from the east are traveling in a narrow bandwidth, and cyclists are presumably coming into the area at the end of the crosswalk, and this is all coming together in a rather narrow space that has a fire hydrant in the middle of it. So to me, that's going to be a big pinch point. It's also a great place to pull up, along with the rest of that red zone. So I'm not sure what we can do to affect that.
Well, I think we had a suggestion from a member of the public who lives across from a similar situation and observed that signage helped quite a bit. So I would suggest that we stipulate that that be added to the boundaries of this turnout and other red zones in that area. Similar signage as on Spokane at the turnaround by the middle school. I also wonder about doing something akin to what is done, I see done sometimes on construction projects. If there is a problem, call. I don't know that the parents who are dropping children off would call, but that would at least give the neighbors and the residents who live nearby and observe what's going on more. There's the number, they wouldn't have to remember it, they wouldn't have to have the phone. Yeah, more agency, so I think that would be great if there was a number that could be listed on the signage. As far as, well, so right now there's a white zone, but it has 2-hour parking. I mean, I've observed that people who are picking up children from the pool, you know, sometimes they might arrive 10 minutes early and sit there. So I'm a little concerned about those parents not having any like functionally 20-minute spaces. I mean, those were not 20-minute spaces by signage, but that's kind of how I observe them functioning often. So I wonder about taking some of the angle spaces that are to the east and making those 20-minute spaces in the interim to provide that same function for the aquatic center. And as far as the bike racks, I asked for an occupancy survey of the bike parking because I think the bike parking as it is now is used almost completely by the high school. And now you're talking about adding another 200 students. Now probably a much smaller percentage of those students will actually bike to this location than do the high school students, but nonetheless, it seems like there's going to be more demand for bike parking rather than less. So I think just relocating the existing bike parking is not enough. There should be more bike parking added.
There's additional bike parking, like, between some of the buildings that I just noticed today as I was dropping my kids off. It wasn't a ton, but there may be some other spaces that we're just not aware of, other than the ones right in front of the pool.
So I surveyed the rest of the parking, bike parking this spring at the high school during a school session on a random day that was not rainy. But not a whole week that we could average, okay, you know.
You didn't average it out.
I'm sorry, so this is somewhat anecdotal, right. So the racks were moved from their original place to make way for the construction.
Okay.
And so they're located around the edge of the theater and arts building. They were fully subscribed and bikes were parked on railings and ramps leading to the pool back end. And one of the bike racks was completely blocked by a table. So that's something I plan to take up with the principal of the high school and probably the superintendent. But that all in good time. So yes, there does seem to be an issue of bike parking at the high school. I have to say on that same survey, and I believe this is due to the construction blockage of paths at the high school, the pool bike parking was undersubscribed compared to the rest of the bike parking at the site. That was one day. And in the past, I'm pretty sure that that parking has served as an overflow for the high school. But since you can't get around the new classrooms anymore, I think it's much less desirable. There is no bike parking, I'm sorry, I could go on for a long time. There's no bike parking on the north side of the campus near the Thousand Oaks entrance, which is another, I plan to bring that up as well offline.
Is the bike parking that was along the railings on the east side of the main building, south of the gym. Is that still available, or is that blocked?
That is the bike parking that was removed and relocated.
I see, okay. Okay, so the same number of spaces, but just moved around.
The way they were
Except for-
installed, you can't use all the spaces, and they're wave racks, which, as
Right.
we know, are not state-of-the-art and can't hold as many bikes as,
Yeah,
for example, even the pool racks, which are too close together, but that's another issue. Right, so I do plan to address this offline, and I may come back to this body later, but there are places to address having more bike parking. So I think that the most important thing at this point is, are there enough spaces if just the pool bike parking gets relocated on site in the drop-off area? And I think from my experience, the answer to that question is maybe not.
Do you know if there's bike parking, and I'm talking to you like you're the expert at bike parking at the high school, but do you know if there's new bike parking associated with the new building that's currently under construction?
Now, I'm not going to answer that because we have an expert here.
Please come up.
So the project team has been discussing how to maximize bike parking when the project is finished. So we realized that the construction zone, the fencing, the logistics did impact the bike parking in the short term, but we've had some discussions with the strollers and rollers who want to provide input on how to maximize the bike parking involving the principal, but that's very much on our agenda that we're going to address that as the building is finishing up and things clear out. We'll get a sense for how to maximize that. So that's on our agenda.
Great. And as a stroll and roll, I look forward to exploring that with you and working out ways to make sure that the high school students coming in on bikes aren't running over the elementary school students for the next 4 years.
Absolutely.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
So we were talking about the crescent, shall we call it? And the only other thing that comes to mind, other than, of course, communicating with parents, which I plan to be involved in as a Safe Routes to School volunteer, we have seen some treatments instituted at the middle school. The zebra armadillos have been installed on the street. So there might be a possibility of using some on-street treatment to discourage use of that area.
So my thoughts on that, if we want to maintain it as a fire access, we might or might not get fire department buy-in for putting obstructions in the street, but I would recommend posting no stopping fire lane signs as the sign type that most clearly defines what you can and can't do. That's a R26F sign. Specified them many times. And to help encourage people not using that as a drop-off, it makes sense that the spaces immediately west of it be designated as full-time drop-off spaces. So we're giving people the opportunity to do the right thing. And obviously, how long people stay is another question. We can specify time limits. But again, white zones, theoretically, you're not supposed to leave your vehicle unattended. But how long you're supposed to stay there with your car depends on the uses we want to provide
the
for.
airport-style announcement, right? Please do not leave your car. Yeah. I will note that currently the next spot to the westbound on Portland is a handicapped spot.
Yeah.
Which is an appropriate place to put it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Other comments?
Yeah, I had a question for Ms. Hershey, if you'd be willing to come up. Do the signs that you observed that the school district put up that say no school drop-off, did they also make some statement about it being a fire lane?
They do not. I wish they did.
Okay.
But formerly, there were very demure, tiny signs that just said no parking.
Okay.
And that doesn't do the job at all.
Okay.
So you need, I think fire zone would be helpful. And people don't understand the red curb means no stopping, no standing, no parking. and they don't understand that.
So no drop off.
Yeah,
So fire lane, no school drop off.
yeah.
Yeah.
I also think your idea of making some of those parking spaces 20-minute spaces for parents to wait when they're picking up kids at the pool, I wonder if the same idea couldn't be provided for along Key Route for parents waiting, because the worst time is school pickup, because parents come like to pick up a fourth grader, and they come and wait in the drop-off pickup area until their child emerges from the school. And if they had another area where they could wait, I think that would really help.
And that can be another instance where the district can work with the aquatic center to ensure we're not as school ends, we're not starting aquatic classes right as school is getting out, have some sort of break between that might help with the.
No, I think it's important to make sure that the aquatic classes start 5 minutes after Marin gets out, so that you get that crosstown.
I guess one of my concerns is just how, as a parent, we picked our school based on what was closest to us, and I think a lot of people do that just so they can walk to school. So we're having families that are going to probably need to drive to get their kids to school. So I feel like it's going to be a little different than what currently exists now. And I think one of my concerns is I'm wondering if the existing loading zone on Portland, if that is large enough, or if expanding that would also help with picking up, dropping off. Because at Marin, people just park in the loading zone in the morning, and I go by and I count the empty cars, and when the police officer's there, that is not a problem. But most mornings it is a problem, and you see kids, getting out of the cars in the middle of the street. So, other than having a police officer there regularly, or encouraging people to bike or walk, it's going to be messy. I think just kind of have to accept that. But I think that I don't know how many spaces that is on Portland now. Do we know how many parking spaces that is the existing?
White.
I'm sorry, not Portland. I'm Key Route, on Key Route, sorry.
I think it was in the staff memo, but I'll try to go find it.
So expanding the loading zone on Key Route is what I was saying.
Blue zone.
The blue zone
is now 91 feet, so that would be 4 to 5 cars, depending on car size and how tight people fit in.
Mm-hmm.
So let me just say that there is a Safer Schools Albany task force, which is addressing the issue of student rehousing or moving to other schools during the rebuilding, first of Ocean View, then of Marin. And we're working closely with the superintendent and the school district to communicate to parents, to explore active transportation alternatives and carpools and whatever means to both assist families who are now having to go across town and to have the goal of having safe and calm drop-off zones if possible.
And I know Marin, I'm assuming all the schools have the 4th and 5th graders do the on-street bike training. Marin had it, I assume they all.
Right, so the Safer School program in Albany includes on-street training, classroom, blacktop, and on-street bike training for all elementary students, either in 4th or 5th grade, before they leave the elementary years.
So it's like, it would be great if that could happen for Ocean View students in the fall, and there is on-street on how can we get to,
I'm trying to remember that the 4th and 5th graders might have had it last year, and we tend to do it every other year at each school site, or it is done every other year. That's a county program. We're certainly looking at all those things.
Other comments?
I'm ready to make a motion.
I did want to, it sounds like the things that we want to add, you probably already have this for your motion, are the signage at the Crescent area, the 20-minute parking spots. So I think relative to this, those seem to be the two pieces. I agree with Fareed on the staffing plan. It seems like our charge for tonight is fairly narrowly scoped. It's approving the curb management and basically the striping of the loading zones to accommodate the elementary school. So I believe that's what our motion will be towards. But it'd be great if we could have the school district come back and talk about the staffing plan and also bike parking. I think that's not also in the motion. It's just another check-in prior to the project moving forward or for opening. One thing I think I've seen it in Berkeley, the rolling drop-off zones at elementary schools, which are very efficient ways. I believe they're parents volunteer drop-off zones, and they really make the drop-off efficient, right? So no one's hanging out. They're there facilitating getting your kid out the car, walking to the school. I don't know how many people they have to make sure that your kid gets into the door safely. But I've seen it happen, and I'm like, wow, there's no double parking, and there's 3 or 4 cars in the zone at a time, and it just constantly moves. It's slow, but it moves. So when we're looking at staffing plans, I think those are the things that we want to see is how are staff going to manage this, crossing guards, teachers, administrative staff, or volunteer parents? Because I think if we can manage this, then I don't think there are going to be significant issues. But if we don't, you see all of our elementary schools and pretty crazy. So I'm hoping at least to see something come back on the staffing.
I'm sorry, can we just clarify for the 20-minute parking?
Yeah.
Where would that be? Did we identify a location?
Yeah, there's a few. I don't know how many we want to identify in the angled parking on Portland by the park. I don't know if we wanted to identify further ones on key routes or not. I think that was something that you proposed.
Would it be 20 minutes just during certain hours, or?
Yeah,
Yes,
probably, right? I would assume it's.
Well, no, I mean, the aquatic center is kind of going all day. So for the ones at least on Portland, I would have them 20 minutes all day would be my recommendation, because like I say, people are coming and going. Although I guess in terms of when children get picked up and dropped off, in the summertime, it's all day. I don't see tuning that to something less than a day. And there are 4 20-minute spaces that are already on the key route north of the 3-minute loading zone that's proposed there. And so those are well located for the northern building.
Right.
So I just put that out there in terms of are more needed or not. I don't know. I never drove to the high school, so I don't know how impacted those are during high school times. But if they're only 20 minutes and there's a half-hour offset between high school begin-end and the Ocean View begin-end, then they should be available to both populations. So I don't know if more 20-minute spaces are really needed on key route. I'm open to it, but I just want to point that out.
I would support making some of the diagonal spaces between Pomona and Ramona 20-minute.
Yeah, and I would suggest if we put that in motion, then we leave it to staff discretion to determine how many.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And staff can talk to the aquatic center staff since they're school district staff.
And figure out if it makes sense to do it weekdays or weekends and weekdays or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think the item is looking for a recommendation.
So I'll recommend that we approve the encroachment permit with the condition of adding no school drop-off fire lane signage at the turnaround at Portland and Pomona. And I think for that approval, I'm going to leave it at that, and then I'll make a different motion with some of these other elements.
Okay.
just to keep it clean, encroachment permit, other stuff.
I'll second that.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? Abstain? Okay.
And so then for the other motion, move to ask city staff to talk to the aquatic center staff about creating 20-minute parking spaces in the westernmost angled spaces along Portland to the east of the aquatic center. And, I also didn't, well, I could have mentioned that, but I'll do it here. To consider adding a phone number to signage around the loading zones that people can contact if there's trouble, if there's problems, and to assure that there is sufficient separation between the northern new drop-off and the crosswalk that is adjacent. And then, well, I don't know, should I add more bike parking based on occupancy survey? Or do you want to leave that for the future?
So we can either make the motion or we can have come back.
Okay.
It sounds like there's still stuff to be determined according to school staff after construction's done, and then maybe there's more opportunities for parking.
Yeah, okay. All right, so I'll leave the bike parking for later. So for now, this motion is about 20-minute parking for the pool, phone number on the signs, and separation between the drop-off and the crosswalk. Those are the three items in this motion.
I'll second that.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? Abstain? None? That's it.
Thank you for bringing this.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, yeah. Thanks very much to everybody.
Okay. So we jumped around a little bit. We're back to 5-1, Albany Pavement Management Program. Thank you for your patience. Appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Robert Gonzalez. Jenny Van Dyke is here to present some updates on the pavement management program. Let me start with a couple of the first slides, and then I'll hand it over to Jenny. So this is the second of two-part presentation on staff's, the city's pavement management program and capital improvement program for paving. Staff's effort here is an asset management approach to this vital asset. It's probably the biggest asset the city has in terms of capital assets. NCE, Nichols Engineering, and Jenny have been actively involved in this for better part of a year and a half, 2 years, developing several scenarios for us. We've put them through the ringer, her and her staff, developing lots of different scenarios, tweaking a lot of different dials, and really putting in a thoughtful approach to this analysis. The first part of this presentation, and Jenny, I'm going to ask you to move this forward. I don't know if I have, just moving the slide forward. So yeah, that's perfect. Okay. So in the first part of the presentation, we spent some time looking at the database, which is the first of the kind of the top right corner, which develops the functional class and identifies every segment of pavement in the city, length, size, material, and then again functional class, which is an important part of the database, which indicates treatment and how it's budgeted. So this is a tool that we use for essentially capital project budgeting over several years. So the second part of the presentation is really going to be us looking for input back from the commission regarding budget level and how these payment sections are treated on a network level. So the first part of that, like I said, in the first part of our presentation, was looking at functional class. The second thing was reviewing the current pavement condition index, which is in the at-risk category and ways of moving that forward and improving that. So really what we're seeing, looking backwards, is a position where we haven't been investing enough money in the city streets. We have some budget to spend now. We've spent some time this year actively putting in a lot of slurried streets, and Jenny can kind of cover that a little bit. We're in design for Washington Avenue at this point between San Pablo and Key Route, and we're going to extend that even further. And then moving forward, we're going to lay out a two-year budget for candidate streets, and we'll present that to you tonight. So with that, I'll give it over to Jenny to run through this.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next slide. Thank you, Robert. Good
Thank you.
evening, commissioners. This map, this is a result of some of the meetings that were conducted by city staff and NCE during commission meetings during January and March of this year. There was some feedback that the city and NCE received from the commission on identifying revisions to the functional classifications that were identified in the city's database. And so using both comments from the commission and then recommendations provided by the city staff, the functional classifications were revised, and this map illustrates those final recommendations from city staff. And I believe a memo has been provided to the commissioners that was developed by city staff.
Yes, that's correct. Justin Freed, our transportation planner, developed a memo on April 5th that laid out the functional class changes that were based on the general plan.
So I won't go into much detail on that. This map reflects those recommendations from city staff. This table, which I believe we presented last time, at least in January, now has been updated to reflect some of the changes that were made over January and March, or past that memo, and gives you an idea of what the PCIs are by each functional classification. What stands out in this table is that about a third of the network is considered arterial or collector, and a third of the centerline miles of local streets are classified as other in the network now. And overall, as Robert mentioned, the PCI is 53, and we're seeing that those streets that are classified as other have a PCI of 59, which is higher than even the collectors at this point. So there's some seeing those statistics at this point in time. There was the city then made some priorities to make sure that there was some equity in the progress and in the condition improvement of each of these classifications, so that we didn't have any stragglers.
I'm sorry, another street functional classification, what would an example be? Like, why would?
Oh, yes. Well, this is what was discussed in that memo issued by the city, by city staff. So other, again, is a local street or a residential street that serves as a collector for bicyclists.
Okay.
So it's got some form of a bike route on it. Thanks. So now I'll move on to kind of the next steps that we've taken since updating the functional classifications, which was a criteria adjustment essentially. And these are all an effort to develop the paving CIP that the city staff is working on over these next couple of years. So one of the variables to consider, at least when using the Street Saver software and database, is the weighting factor, which is something that's based on the functional classification and the traffic volume of that road. So for instance, an arterial has a higher weighting factor than a collector or a residential street because of its usage from a traffic standpoint. So we wanted to see if there was any benefit in, when developing these budget scenarios that I'll share later, if there was any benefit in changing what StreetSaver has for as default in the program to see if that made any sort of substantial, useful impact on more evenly distributing the improvements between each functional class. So I'll get to the results of that shortly. One of the other variables that we considered was playing with how much budget do we want to allocate to each functional classification, instead of just letting StreetSaver decide for itself using these other variables such as functional class, or such as the weighting factors by functional classifications or treatment and costs. How can we use the budget and maybe allocate more here to one functional classification versus another to make sure that its condition improved. There was some equity in the improvement over the 10-year period. Another variable that we considered was the treatment. So what we did, for the most part, it was really to reflect the city's priority to have, to use overlays on those residential streets that are classified as other, that serve kind of as collectors for bicyclists. On a lot of the on the residential streets, there we've used Cape seals as a cost-effective treatment to treat roads in fair or even down to poor condition, because it's still effective on those local roads. But for the bike routes, the smoothness of those treatments is not as preferred to those riders. So that was an adjustment that was made when developing this paving CIP and in the StreetSaver database. And then one of the target, the target condition that the city wanted to see was, as I'd mentioned actually earlier, over the 10 years, we'd like to see some equity in the improvement of each of these functional classifications. So we were able to achieve that, and I'll show those results in the coming slides. So this slide, I think we might have touched on this in the past, but this is sort of the flow chart, I guess, of all the considerations taken to develop the CIP and then end up into construction. So in order to develop the list of candidate streets, there are a number of factors, as you can see. The local priorities, whether it be functional or bike routes, for instance, or more heavily used streets, and ATP improvements, along with planned utility work, making sure that that is considered in your 2-year plan to make sure that we aren't paving right before some utility has well in advance planned work. So doing our best to anticipate that as well. And then we have the use of the StreetSaver funding scenarios, which is taking that, those factors that I mentioned earlier, along with budgeting constraints that may be existing, and then or targeted conditions that we can use to figure out what are our needs compared to what we have right now. So, and then once that list of streets that is output and suggested by StreetSaver, for instance, over that 10-year period, looking at a snapshot of it for maybe, say, a couple of years, seeing what are the candidates that were output by StreetSaver, and then taking a look at those to see how those can be packaged together, because those have been identified as cost-effective sections and treatments to be selected to reach those conditions that you were just targeting, or based on the available budget that you have. So by taking that output along with aggregating the results geographically and by treatment, and then using, going out and visiting them in the field, certainly to make sure that the the treatments are appropriate for each of those sections is an important part of it as well that had taken place when developing this plan. And then our next steps, beyond kind of where we stand now, is investigation and design. So pavement design is certainly a big part of it to make sure that, not just based on visual assessment, are we making decisions on how to pave the road? Pavement design is an important part of that. And then if there's, of course, the development of the plan specifications and estimate. And then we're off to bidding and construction for the 2-year plan. And then this is just a refresher on the PCI conditions, since we use that term, that pavement condition index that comes from Street Saver. So again, a 0 is a failed road and goes up to 100, which is a brand new road. And the city's PCI as of the beginning of this year was estimated to be about 53, so in the at-risk category. So now we'll get into 3 scenarios that we ran with the city. The first one was based on the city's anticipated current funding levels over the next 10 years. That includes the current CIP budget, along with some assumptions extending that budget through the next several years afterwards, up through 2028. So each of these scenarios looks at a 10-year period starting in 2019. Scenario 2 was one based on the results that we got from scenario 1. Scenario 2 was based on now targeting a PCI. So what will it take to get the city PCI into, in this case, a 75 would be in the good condition category, whereas right now it's at risk. So that was a case where we were targeting a PCI over 10 years, and then Street Saver helps us determine what is the funding level needed to reach that. And same thing with scenario 3, reaching even further up to a PCI of 85, which is just below the very good condition, so reaching pretty high for the city. So now I'll go through the 3 budget scenarios that we ran. So again, so this chart just gives us an idea of how they all plot against one another and the different funding levels that it took to get there. So again, starting at 53 at the beginning of 2019, there's some work that's been completed, a slurry seal program that was completed by the city this summer. And then some planned work for Washington Avenue, for instance, mentioned by Robert, and that big push to get this current CIP budget spent by the city over the next couple of years at least. So that's why we see some bumps in those first couple of years, 2019 and 2020, reflecting those larger programs, or that large influx in spending. And then from there, budget number 1, or scenario number 1, is the orange line on the bottom, and that's comes out to be roughly $1.5 million a year over 10 years, or $15 million over 10. And so that's the city's current anticipated budget levels. So the good news is that it does anticipate that, or this scenario anticipates that the PCI will increase by 14 points over 10 years, with some obviously big jumps in the first couple of years after that large chunk of spending, and then kind of slowly increasing over the next 10 years to a PCI of 67. In the blue category is called fair condition before you get into the good condition category. Then if the city were to increase its spending by roughly 23% over 10 years at roughly its annual budget of about $1.9 million, then it's expected to increase its PCI into the good condition category at 75. And then even further, reaching up about adding another 50% to the current budget would get you up to 85 by 10 years. The one thing, so going back to those criteria adjustments I mentioned earlier about the weighting factors and the budget allocation. So first off, the weighting factors, we did go in and test those out to see if it had any sort of impact to benefit the network overall, or making sure that the other category was doing well at the end of 10 years. And what we found was that the default weighting factors that are assigned by StreetSaver were working fine, and it turned out that by making any significant changes to those weighting factors was kind of steering things further off course than we wanted. So, but we did test them out to see if it had any sort of positive impact, but we found that instead, allocating a specific amount of the budget to your higher volume roads, for instance, arterials and collectors, and a specific amount, lumping the rest of the budget towards residential and other, or your local roads, had a much more stable impact. So, for instance, and actually all three scenarios, the spending was found to be, to reach these goals of this even distribution of improvement over 10 years, which I'll show in the next table. Actually, maybe I'll go there now. By spending roughly 70% of the annual budget on arterials and collectors, got these more stable improvements for those two functional classifications, and then the other 30%, of course, going to your residential streets, residential and other streets. So you can see that in this table, where even with the first scenario, current funding, reaching that PCI of 67, there's a pretty even distribution between the functional classifications. So that using that split of the budget was very effective in this case. And on top of that, keeping the PCIs within a range of each other, along with it, which ultimately results in a range of the overall network PCI at the end of 10 years. So the same thing goes for scenarios 2 and 3. So that turned out to be the magic mix for those 3 scenarios. And then just to note again about the difference in spending between the 3 scenarios. So the current funding scenario is roughly $15 million over 10 years, or roughly $1.5 million a year. And then another $400,000 a year would is expected to improve the city PCI to 75 in 10 years. And then another, more than doubling that additional effort of up to $900,000 a year would get you up to 85. So these are some of those budget numbers that Robert was mentioning earlier that are things for the commission to consider on, where to go from here with the existing funding level and where to maybe take it in the future. So these are just a couple of pie charts to help further show the impacts of these 3 scenarios on the network. So in the current condition, so this is for the entire pavement network, you've got just a little over a quarter of your network in very good, so maybe 40%-ish in the good condition category. But then again, you also have about 40% of it currently in the poor and very poor conditions. And then the results from scenario 1 with your existing funding levels, as you can tell by the increase in your network PCI, that amount of streets in the good and very good conditions increases significantly, which is great, to about 3/4 of your network. And then following that, with the 2 other scenarios increasing it to 75 and 85, you're seeing those slices of the pie in poor and very poor start to diminish and become much better managed. So out of the results of those scenarios, there were, as I mentioned earlier, StreetSaver outputs a list of recommended streets to be treated. And so that could range from anything from a slurry seal, crack sealing, to overlays and reconstructions, which are all candidates in the treatment decision tree for the network. So given that the city has completed 5.5 miles just this summer of slurries and one Cape Seal project throughout town, what we wanted to focus on was a rehabilitation and reconstruction project. Since preventative maintenance had been addressed in this year over a fairly large chunk of the network, we wanted to focus on those two types of treatments, some heavier maintenance. So this list that I have on the screen right here is half of it. This would be all of the arterials and collectors that have been identified as candidates for anything from mill and overlay, which is that rehabilitation treatment, or reconstruction. And overall, I'll show you the other half of the list, the residentials and others. Overall, we've selected about 4 miles of streets as candidates that fit into the remaining CIP budget of the city has programmed about $5.2 million for this 2-year program, and that comes out of the overall $8.6, I think, million CIP project or CIP program that the city's identified for a 5-year span. This list, though, adds up to just over that to allow some flexibility in choosing the final candidate list after pavement design and civil or construction estimating, for instance, to see which ones may need to be removed or adjusted. And then, as Robert also mentioned, Washington Avenue is shown on here as well. Part of that CIP program is it's in design right now for construction in 2020 to be reconstructed. And one thing we wanted to show was there on this list of arterials and collectors, we have a number of streets that are on the bike route or bike route map, the city's master plan. So a number of sections will intersect with those bike routes. And then here are the residentials and collectors, or I'm sorry, residential and other sections. And in this case, again, we've got asphalt overlays and reconstruction selected, and roughly 2.2 miles of those local roads are selected as candidates. And then we have part of Keynes Avenue, which is a local street that's also on a bike route that's been selected. And here's a map to help illustrate that list, to kind of give you an idea of the distribution of the work throughout the city. Blue being those overlay streets, and then red being those that are candidates for reconstruction. And then Washington is also shown on there as well. So again, the city CIP budget for paving was estimated in 2018 to be $8.6 million over 5 years, and so this 2-year program that we're presenting tonight is meant to consume about $5.2 million of that. And then in 2019, just kind of looking forward and what's going on currently, again, the city completed 20 or slurry seal of 20 streets throughout town. It also has its PTAP evaluation going on right now, which will help to update those PCIs and further the budget options report that will need to be updated as it needs to be done regularly for the city. And then as we mentioned this evening and over the last couple months, updating the CIP criteria, taking input from the commission and input from city staff on how to improve the network. And then next step will be to design year one of this 2-year program. And then next year in 2020, the plan is to reconstruct Washington Avenue and begin construction of year one of the 2-year plan, along with beginning design for year two, which should take place in 2021. And then from there, you start over and begin the next 2-year plan, selecting streets for your CIP.
Can I ask, when you refer to the years, are you referring to the calendar year or the fiscal year?
Calendar.
Great.
So I'm going to hand this back to you, Robert, on the performance monitoring and your PTAP update for the city.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. So the PTAP update, it's done on a 2-year cycle for arterials and collectors and 4 years for residential. It was done in 2013, I believe, and 2016. It was not done in 2018, so we were past due for that. So we got on the list for that. MTC was nice enough to give us the $15,000 to bring on pavement engineering. So NCE and Nichols are on a list of rotating consultants that MTC pre-qualifies. Pavement engineering is also on that list. So this past spring, they initiated that process. I think in June, they spent a lot of time on our city streets, going around and reevaluating our PCI, bringing those data points up to date. So we're right in the middle of that process of us kind of going through that and reviewing some of those results at this point. So that will be input data for the next round of CIP. We couldn't wait for that. We were already in the process of working with NCE in this capacity here. So all of this information, all the new information on PTAP will be over and above what we have now. And in terms of annual reporting to traffic and safety, this is an effort, again, perhaps in the past this hasn't been a regular effort on the part of Public Works, but we want to make this as transparent as possible. So we're doing, at a minimum, an annual check-in to show you guys what we're doing in terms of progress towards our CIP goals and progress towards our PCI. Joe Reary is here. He's actually part of the pavement engineering team. He came out of the goodness of his heart. He was actually up the street in Berkeley for another meeting, and he found out about this one. He couldn't stay away. So. Beyond that, let me see if there's, on the next page on the summary. So we did mention we're upgrading the program to include 5.6 miles of bike routes. So what that's referring to the other category. So we wanted to make sure we were identifying bike routes specifically. We're also looking at perhaps even including the off-street networks like Albany in that, so we can at least track that, even if we don't necessarily regularly put that in the CIP. That's something we can track as well. And the current funding level we talked about, which is at risk of 53. With the CIP budget that we have, we're expecting that will get us to about 67. So we're inviting feedback in terms of where you think, in terms of the city's value, do you want to see more of that, or because that comes with a challenge with staff to actually find the money. But getting to a PCI of 75 over a 10-year period would mean 23% more spending. We did do a good effort of stress testing our residents this year between putting in several thousand feet of sewer project and 20 street segments that Jenny mentioned with the paving. So we know that our residents are resilient in terms of their interest in getting new pavement.
Put it in the climate action plan.
Yes, pavement action plan. So that's it. So that's what we had.
You left out the fiber that's been going around town too, and the other projects.
Yeah. I won't even mention the city of Berkeley happens to have a trunk sewer going through at least one of our streets. So that happened too. But with that, we'll close the formal presentation and hand it over to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And thank you again for waiting and going through the other items first. All right, I'll turn it to the commission for questions. Who would like to begin? Preston, all right. Surprise, let's go.
Shocking. So first of all, thank you for answering my email and providing the PCI, and thank you for answering my question again about Pomona. I remembered a way to ask this before, so I'm sorry to make you answer that. And you already answered my question, why not wait till the current PTAP has some PCIs that could be used to update? I will ask, though, could those PCIs be used to relook at the second year of this 2-year program? And is there a plan to do that?
There is. So the PCIs go through a QA/QC process, and that's scheduled to be completed and the report finalized by the end of the year.
Okay.
So that's enough time to look at that second year.
So how I got involved in this, just to put it on the record, is because I think there was no QA/QC process in 2014 or 13, I guess. And MTC has told me that. I'm in a dialogue with an MTC staff member, so I'm curious, what does that QA/QC process that they've implemented since then look like? Sort of what are the features of it? Or
I'm going to actually suggest that I'm going to ask Joe to come up and actually provide a little bit of that. This is my first rodeo, so to speak, in terms of
we'll learn together.
QA/QC process.
Come on, Joe, it was worth coming. Right on.
Hi, Joe Ryrie with Pavement Engineering. And so the QC/QA process, there's several levels to it. One of the biggest things that we've seen is that MTC, who sponsors the PTAP program, requires all of their consultants to have each one of their raters certified, and they put them through a certification process that involves rating certain roads and how close do they get to the actual number, and consultants have been kicked off the team as a result of that because there's too much deviation. Their goal is to try and, well, first of all, let me back up. When you do ratings, it's based on visual evaluation. And there's 8 different distresses that you're measuring in the street. And you take sample areas that are representative sample areas down the street. And so you're trying to, so you can get a little bit off in there. So what they're trying to do is create a system that will allow you that no matter who the rater is, you're going to get to the PCI plus or minus 5. And that's the range that they're shooting for with their QC process, the rater certification process. Now, they require each of the consultants to go through a QC process as well. And so the way that we implement that at Pavement Engineering is that our raters will go out and look at all of the roads. Then they'll re-rate 10% random of the roads and then compare their data back and forth. In addition to that, there's a supervisor rating that goes out and looks at what MTC says is you're supposed to look at 5%. We end up looking at more than that because we're also looking at comparing it to the previous year's PCIs. And if it's outside of a range that you anticipate, because the pavement is always deteriorating, and if there's no treatments on it, then you can almost kind of predict about where it should be. And if it's outside of that range, then we want to look at it. What happened? Was there some type of treatment that someone missed to put into the system that would have adjusted it, or why is it different? So we go out and look at those. In addition to that, MTC has hired a third-party consultant. It's Chico State University, yeah. And they come in through their program, and they do a representative sample of all of the PTAP work that's going on that particular year. So they'll go sample all around. So it's pretty stringent in terms of the QC/QA process. Does that help describe it?
That's great. And I don't know if you know the history here, but in 2013, we questioned the scoring that the consultant did, a council member and myself, and then city staff ended up rescoring half the streets by a whole category or more. So that's why I'm so freaked out about it. So I'm very glad to hear that there's been some processes instituted to try to prevent that from happening again. Thanks.
Okay, cool.
A question on the planning. So the PCIs, the average PCIs that have been presented do not include the recent slurry sealing, I'm presuming? I mean, they're based on the pre-slurry sealing, or not slurry sealing, pre-sealing work that was done this June?
The average PCI of 53 was taken from January of this year.
Okay.
So that does not include the work that was just completed, just because of the timing of the work compared to our analysis. However, knowing that that work was scheduled and booked, it was included in your budget scenarios that we presented.
And then you mentioned, and I'm sorry, I had a momentary lapse of attention. You mentioned the split on budget for the different FCs that you used. What was that again? Was it 30% to?
Sure. Roughly 2/3 to 70% going towards arterials and collectors.
Okay.
The rest, the other third or 30% or so going towards residentials and others.
Okay. And so, yeah, I didn't realize that Street Saver had that function. Obviously, it has tons of things I don't realize, but so it has a function where you can direct budget specifically to an FC, or you have to, there's a cheat, there's a little cheat.
You gotta do some handiwork.
It's a little cheat code. Okay.
But it's possible.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Let the record show that you didn't admit that that was cheating, that that is adjustment. Please stop using.
I'm channeling my kids in their video game Arcana too much.
Additional questions? Probably will, but yeah. Anyone else have additional questions?
Me.
Christine, are you here as resident or staff? Do you want to come up and make public comment? Sure. Yeah, I wanted to say something. Come on up.
To let you know.
Come up to the mic. Thanks.
So I'm Christina Holhorst, and I work for the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. I also live on St. Gabriel. And thank you very much, because I love the zebra armadillos in front of Brighton, in front of the middle school. But what I wanted to say is I'm the project manager for PTAP, and because you're doing some design work, Preston, you've been writing my boss and copying me.
I didn't know.
So something, I saw that there's some design happening, and so what you could do is PTAP has, we primarily do pavement management, because what MTC wants to do is, in order to improve the PCIs across the Bay Area, that's why good data in to get these scenarios is really important to us. But we also have two other projects that we do, and that's non-pavement asset management. So that's anything else that's not the pavement that's on the street. But we do have a design project, and Albany can apply for it. The grant amount is up to $100,000, but you guys would do the 20% local match, which is what you do for these projects. So you guys paid, the project amount was $15,000, and you paid a 20% local match of that. So if you go for a design, I mean, it's not going to cost $100,000, but you could apply for that. It would federalize your project, but there is money in the PTAP program. We don't give a lot of design grants, but I wanted to let you know that that's an option.
Great. Thank you.
And if you have any questions, let me know.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right.
Other questions on this side? Emerson, you can.
I did have some other questions.
Yeah. We're on to comments. Right? Reed, did you have any questions before we go on to comments?
One quick question. There was an identification of how much additional funding per year would be necessary to reach the higher thresholds. Has staff considered what, tax rate might be necessary to achieve that if we were to just try to do a pay-as-you-go type of program within the city?
So one of the things we're going to start, and where this is important, is we're going to start tuning up our CIP. Mm-hmm. And then there are the decisions, are we going to put money towards other things, or are we going to put it towards paving? And so I think that's the first step of that conversation. And then we would look to other taxes. I think, as you know, a lot of our local paving money comes from, what is it, Measure M, the street and storm drain tax. So there's somewhat of a split of money that goes to paving, and some of it goes to storm drain. In a lot of cases, storm drain's incorporated with paving, but we also do standalone storm drain projects. So there's a little bit of a game of Tetris that we're going to do, but I think it's important to know that, hey, if we can come up with $400,000 a year, that gets us to a different level. I think for me, what was good to know is that we have a backlog of money that we want to spend right now. That gets us up into the fair category, and then at least the funding that we have programmed right now maintains those gains. And that was one of our things that I wanted to make sure, is that whatever we're doing is we're preserving the gains we get by from the investments we make, and that we then buy down our backlog of poor and fair streets. So we're at least doing that and maintaining the gains. And then if we can come up with 200,000, maybe we get halfway there. I know it's probably not linear, but it gives us a marker of, if we can squeeze out a couple more bucks here and there, what we might get from that.
Do the dollars made available for paving, is there more of it available as time goes, as you do more of these projects, or is it just go back in and cycle, and you have to keep the upkeep of all of your streets, and that's what the dollar amount is that you guys are targeting?
The dollar level is going to fluctuate somewhat, but we have a 10-year climb before we get into the good category. Then it may level off into more of a maintenance phase. So if you look at some of the younger cities in the area that didn't invest this, they're already in that maintenance phase, and you can look at their cost per mile might be a little bit lower than ours. Yeah, because the redevelopment, when you do a full depth reconstruction, that's a big investment for, a per mile or a per foot cost.
Yeah. And then if the staff elects to put to try to get the funding for the higher PCI, I assume the process is that goes into the CIP, and then it's just weighed over by city council. And I don't know, maybe some of this commission to do?
Correct. That'll go to city council to get approved. One of the things that also, as we get more and more of these streets done, when we do overlays or reconstructions, we're triggered to do curb ramps, and that's a big cost. So to the extent that we get those done and get all the curb ramps, and we're just doing overlays or slurry seals, our costs go down significantly because we're not dealing with the curb ramps, and that can be really expensive.
And is that included in this cost, or?
So we did make an allowance for curb ramps. I think one of the things we see is, as you go north-south, they're longer blocks, so you have less curb ramps. And as you go east-west, you have shorter blocks and you have more curb ramps. So
that's north-south streets in the.
That's why we got a lot of north-south. So we have made allowances, and I think we have Marin on here, and we made an additional sort of bump for curb ramps on Marin because it's a pretty big east-west street.
Well, they're east-west streets, and it's on a slope.
Yeah.
So those will both be challenges.
Those will be challenges, yes.
Aren't there some, if I may, existing drainage issues at corners on Marin?
Yep.
Okay. So those are in the budget as well, I guess?
Again, we've tried to make allowances for that,
Great.
but when we get into the details, that's one of the reasons of having the flexibility. Part of what we're going to do is start the design on all of this, and there's probably some of it that's going to go more quickly, and we'll package that up and get it out, and some of it will probably be more difficult, and I suspect Marin might be one of the more difficult ones.
We are out of time. We need to. We have one more item, and so we need a motion to extend time. I think we can get everything done by 10 o'clock, in my opinion. So I don't know if someone wants to.
I move that we extend the meeting till 10 o'clock.
Okay.
I'll second.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Abstained? None. All right, Preston. Here you go.
So thank you again for sending the PCI table. I just added onto here, so the PCI is in this colored column for each of these street segments. And then I just added the proposed work. And so my question was, most of these ones that are at PCI in the failed category are reconstruct. There's some that are mill and overlay, and I was just kind of curious, what makes those mill and overlay and not construct, or how do you make that decision? I think, so it'll be recorded, thanks.
That's why it was important to do the field review.
Okay.
So it's very likely that the PCI maybe misrepresented the entire section, or maybe there were some, who knows, maybe some patching that was done, or maybe East Bay Mud's been in there and paved half the road. So that's why that was a key part of developing these recommendations, was the field review part of it.
Great.
So some treatments, I would suggest that most of the treatments did remain similar to what was recommended by Street Saver. However, we definitely made modifications as based on the visual conditions.
And one more point to that. This is the starting point of the design, so we're not blindly going forward and just doing this. So we'll do further evaluation as well as like cores to actually really understand what the road section looks like. And then if it comes back that we need to change, we'll change.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm, again, very excited to hear this, because that, again, is not what happened in 2013. They kind of just took whatever came out and ran with it. So it was the wrong data in, and then there was no checking. So that wasn't so painful. That was all I had. That's all the visuals were, right?
Any other comments from group? Is staff looking? Oh, yeah,
Well,
please.
there's questions, so.
Oh, okay. Yeah, please go. Yeah. Oh, okay, I see you used that for your question.
Yeah.
Got it.
I guess if we need a counterpoint, it would be great if instead of just saying other in the designations, it could say residential plus bike facility.
Yes, we can do that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that would help in terms of public communication quite a bit. Yeah. Uh-huh. Let's see, so there's budgeting, but something else now that I know that budget can be targeted by FC through an adjustment mechanism. I wonder about, and this came up, I think, in January when we were talking, and I've seen it come up in other comments and other discussions. Street Saver is predicated to seeking the same PCI across the whole network, but our arterials carry, 10 to 20 times what our collectors and locals do. And so in my dialogue with an MTC manager, I guess, of that group, we made a distinction between sort of the pavement PCI, or the weighted PCI, which is weighted based on area of the pavement, and what we came to term an experiential PCI, which is that the area weighted PCI is not the average PCI that you experience when you travel, because 95% of your trip is on an arterial. And so to me, it doesn't make that much sense to seek a PCI that's uniform throughout the whole network when you have limited funding. I mean, it seems like it'd be better to target a lower PCI for the local streets, which are most of the streets in the city, but which get the least use by any individual, and target a higher PCI for the arterials. Because that way your experiential PCI would be maximized. So in that regard, I would propose that we ask for running a scenario where, say, we target over this 10-year period like a 60 PCI for the locals, and then 65 or 70 for the locals plus bike routes, and the same for the collectors, and then something a bit higher for the arterials, and see how that comes out. or just say we would like a scenario run where we have differentiated PCI targets by functional category, and where do we get with that? Now, on the traditional area-weighted average PCI, it'll probably come out looking worse. But that's not how we all actually travel through the system. We don't spend, 70% of our road area is local streets. We don't spend 70% of our average trip on local streets. So that's my proposal to the commission to chew on. And I didn't think there was a way to do that in Street Saver, but now that I know there's this adjustment, now I'm like, there's maybe a way to get it to make it work. So, what do y'all think?
Fareed was making some great expressions. I want to hear. I
was looking the wrong way, huh?
No, I think that.
Yeah.
I don't know that. Folks who are here to talk to us about pavement are more expert in this than I am, but my perception in dealing with paving plans has been that's why you put more money into the arterial pot, because you're getting more users benefiting from the money that you spend there. You also benefit transit. So everyone benefits when you improve an arterial because everyone's on the arterial. A given residential street, as you pointed out, mostly just the residents there will benefit from it. We don't really want to have perfect arterials and gravel residential streets. So trying to keep the residential streets from deteriorating to the more costly pavement maintenance scenarios is important. I do agree that we probably want to look at the arterials having a higher PCI, and probably the bike routes having a higher PCI, just because they're more sensitive, as a realistic scenario for consideration. So giving some preference there, maybe not huge, but maybe the plus or minus 5 goes to plus or minus 10.
So we have a couple things. We tried to address this, and it did come out that the residentials were the lowest PCI. We did say that we wanted to have a spread of 5 between the highest classification and the lowest. We also are using Cape seals on residential streets. So again, that extends our dollar a little bit. It's probably not the perfect solution, but it's good enough for a residential street. So, I think as we get into this, if we want to talk about spreading that to 10 or 7, or see how that comes in and how that changes our budget category. Yeah, I think that's something we can do.
Well, and so maybe that's looking at the numbers here under the different scenarios. A way to do this would be to mix current funding and improve to 75. So that way you could get your, more of a spread for less than $400,000. I mean, so in other words, you've kind of already done the work. You could, if there's a way to, take some of it from one and some from the other and put it together and then give us a number, how much would that cost? And I think if there's this improving curve, as has been said, presumably when you get to the end of that curve, to stick on that curve takes less money. Mm-hmm. So, I think we're talking about proposing a 10-year tax measure to say, hey, voters, we can go here and then bring it back down. I think we'd have to be able to say, with the funding without this tax, after the end of this 10-year period, we'll be able to hold at this level. But I think that's a much easier sell than just saying, just give us money forever, which is the current street and storm drain taxes give us money forever. But I know with the sidewalk measure, it was a 10-year measure very consciously for a variety of reasons, and it passed 76%. So I think, and that raises about 200,000 a year, so it's about half this 400,000. And it might be that we can get to a PCI difference, that spread of 10 instead of 5 for 250,000 or something. So it would look a lot like that measure in terms of the hit.
So this, like I said, we want this to be an ongoing conversation so we can start making those tweaks we'll get the new data, we'll see where we are, and we'll start with the CIP, and this will be an ongoing conversation with that in mind.
Do you think we get there for 2020 election? Or do you think it's going to be like 2022? I don't waste time, obviously. Once an idea starts sounding good.
I don't know, I don't even.
Yeah. Part of that answer is we're going to be going in the fall with a mid-cycle update with the CIP. So that'll look at the big picture for the entire city, including sidewalk tax and several other funding issues. Right. So that's really probably a good time to ask that question. Whether that's appropriate or not, and then of course we'll get better PCI data from Pavement Engineering at that point.
Well, I mean that makes it sound like we could get there by a 2020 measure. If these two questions I posed could be answered of how do you mix the scenario 1 with scenario 2 to have that 10 PCI spread? What does that funding level require? And if you lost the tax in 10 years, would you be able to stick at that PCI with the ongoing funding, presuming SB1 continues to exist, which it seems like it will?
Right.
So I think with the answers to those questions, that would be the information that could go into a CIP mixer along with everything else that's going on,
right?
And give the council sort of the nuts and bolts it would need.
Yeah.
I find it interesting that if we prioritize the res plus bike streets a little bit, could we have residents saying they want to be part of the bike network instead of the current situation?
Now who's using cheat codes?
The corollary to that may be that Cape Seal is a form of traffic calming.
Touche.
Kind of following up on what you've been talking about, Preston, I think that there's two ways to approach the funding question. One is what's the funding need based on our technical analysis to get to a point of diminishing maintenance cost. The other is to look at what's politically viable for funding and apply that. And kind of my gut sense is the latter is more likely to be what we end up having to do. If there's polling done to say, hey, how much tax will people bear? And then kind of do a quick check to see how does that stack up against where we think the technical need is. Is that going to get us something useful? Maybe it does or doesn't get us all the way there. That would be good, but I think that means we need to be looking at those, identifying what the numbers are that we might want to put on a ballot by next spring. Council's going to have to act on it in the summer to get it on the ballot. So kind of June is that deadline period for council action. Not a lot of time. You got to get council to recognize that they need to look at it in the fall. That gives a little bit of time, just barely, to pull some numbers together for the spring so that they can take action if we want to move forward with it. I think that, the usual question is when you get a street up to good PCI, that street's easy to maintain cost effectively thereafter. But how many other streets did you leave hanging to get there that have now diminished to needing a reconstruct? So that's why, this whole thing is quite an art to find that balance that brings everything up so that your total maintenance costs diminish. And I think certainly everything that you're working on is moving us in that direction. So that's great. But that boost of if we do a 10-year bump, what's it going to do to the long-term maintenance? Usually I love pay-as-you-go when it comes to pavement. If you've allowed things to degrade too far, you miss that opportunity, you fall off the steep end there.
Right.
You don't want that to happen. So sometimes the bond that you spend the money up front really does buy you those savings in the out years. So that may be part of the discussion for council. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, well, so scenario one does, wow, all of a sudden I sound very loud. Scenario does what Street Saver does, which is make the system much more bimodal. And so in fact, the percentage of streets that are failed goes up. The percentage of failed plus poor streets goes down, but the percentage of failed streets goes up. So that's why I think scenario two at least is reducing the failed backlog as well. I would be trepidatious to, I mean, again, you could poll on it, but my guess is that going in and saying, going for scenario three, you know, maybe it's a 20-year plan, and we say, you know, we're going to get this far in 10 years with a small bite, and you'll get a chance to weigh in again in 10 years on whether we take the second bite or you feel good where we are. I'm also, I guess, having been one of the leads on the sidewalk measure, which we didn't do any polling for, you know, we just said, let's shoot it straight. You know, how much do we need as a minimum? Let's just go with that. You can save the money on the polling. It's actually incredibly cheap to put something on the ballot when there's already going to be an election. So I'm kind of inclined towards taking that approach. And maybe it's just because which might be weird for me to say, but not that political. Like, I don't like this sort of polling to titrate, you know, how much pain will they tolerate, as opposed to just telling the voters as straight adults, like, you know, this is what we can do for this much, and we think this is a reasonable balance, and weigh in.
I agree. I think that we could just say, you know, $25 per person gets us at least to the 400,000. Now, the only reason I say polling might come into question is if council's looking at other needs they want to fund, if they want to balance the total. I think as a standalone, I totally agree with you. I would just say throw $25 per person on the ballot and run with it.
Yeah, and so I think, I mean, the other thing I'm aware of, which hasn't seemed to have spun up yet, is the lighting, which I could see getting combined into this. So how does that work out? As far as council, you know, sort of getting council notified that we're headed in this direction, I know when the work plan was discussed, there was, at least from the mayor, it was very much like paving.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think in a way they're actually kind of expecting something like this. They're already, at least some of them, thinking in this direction.
How much money do we generate from the sidewalk?
It's about $220,000 a year, and that's about, it ranges, it's $15 per condominium or apartment, and it goes up to like 38 for a 5,000 square foot lot.
And the CIP includes $200,000 each year, and then if we get additional funding on top of that, we'll spend it.
You will.
That's what you told us to do.
That's why it was a special tax.
Okay, so how do we, unless there's other comments, how do we proceed here, or how
We're asked for input, I think.
Yeah. But
Yeah, I think staff has what we need, unless you want to make it more formal.
I don't think so. I guess the timing is an interesting thing, because if you guys are coming,
We'll take back the discussion about a tax that seemed a new issue, and I really don't know the mechanics of doing that. So let me take that back, and we can discuss it internally, and then figure out what a next step would be.
Okay, just for clarity, I know Preston and I have pretty clearly weighed in. Seems like we like scenario 2. Is that kind of a general consensus?
and we make adjustments to the weights so that we focus on our materials, right?
Yeah.
That works for me. I don't know. Anyone else has comment?
Thank you. Great.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, very much. Thank you.
Okay, we have 10 minutes. I think we can get through.
Unless we extend the meeting.
Unless we extend. But maybe we can get
Challenge.
You don't need to. You can get it done.
I believe in you.
There you go. Let's go for it.
Challenge. Okay.
Let's jump right in. 5.4 amendments to the transportation-related sections of the Albany Municipal Code.
Yes, this is something that's floated around on your agenda always late at the evening. And I think the last substantive discussion you had on this was last summer, and the draft that's before you, there's both a red line version of it that shows the changes and then a clean printout of it so you can read through it. There are three changes to note, and then a variety of very worthwhile, but I'm not sure I need to go through some of the edits. Commissioner Paulson in particular was kind enough to provide some really good comments, but I won't go through those. You see them all here. The three I would mention is, first, in the purpose. In your last substantive discussion, there was an addition of the sentence there at the end about striving to take into consideration mobility, safety, and so forth. So that's been added. The second thing that was a comment received was to add to the duties your role as the city's active transportation advisory committee, which is also in the MTC world goes by the name Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. And then third, in section 20-2.3, just cleaning it up a little bit just to make reference to the selection process of chairs and vice chairs by following rules and procedures adopted by the City Council rather than giving you specific dates and processes. We're just hoping to simplify the ordinance itself by just making it a reference to another document. I'm happy to take any other questions or comments you might have on this. Staff feels like this is pretty much with anything else you might want to add. We feel like it's pretty much ready to go to council. This would officially make you, with their adoption, would make you the Transportation Commission, which is something that they've asked to do, but we need this ordinance to be approved. And then for future discussions, there are lots of other portions of the municipal code that involve transportation that need cleanup with respect to curb management and bicycle and encroachments and so forth. We know there's a lot more work to do, but I think taking it in relatively manageable bites, we can get things done more than trying to do one big comprehensive revision, which just doesn't seem to happen at the rate that I think we all would like to see it. So I'll pause there and see if you have any questions or comments.
Okay, questions?
I seem to recall somewhere, and maybe it was in a motion or something else, but that there was a definition of membership in the Active Transportation Advisory Committee.
A definition of membership?
A definition of what a person, basically somebody needed to participate in active transportation to be on the Active Transportation Advisory Committee. And there was some action taken on that. I don't know, it was like 4 years ago or 5 years ago or something like that. In other words, if this body consists all of people who primarily drive and never walk or ride or use active transportation, then it wouldn't be appropriate for this to be the Active Transportation Advisory Committee.
I think you were probably referring to the resolution that was passed to establish you as the VPAC.
Right.
And you could go back and look and see exactly what that said.
Right, so I think that should be embedded in here.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, saying that we have to serve as that body then makes those rules apply. So, I mean, by reference, I would say it's incorporated, but we might want to be explicit about it here too.
Right, although this is ordinance, right?
This is an ordinance, yes.
And that was
resolution.
That was a resolution, so that's easier to change than this, so I'd be more comfortable if that got embedded in this at this time, since it's explicitly referencing this body in that capacity.
Right, and this document doesn't reference that resolution.
No,
Correct.
It just says it will serve in that capacity.
See.
So, yeah.
I'm not sure that the requirements from the regulatory body that requires that body are as robust as what we thought they should be.
Right.
You mean in that resolution?
I mean that the resolution is more has a stronger aspiration for cycling participation or active mobility transportation participation than what was necessarily required by.
Right, I'm just saying this doesn't preclude the resolution. The resolution still applies. But for clarity, we might want to be more clear here.
Agreed.
All right, so I'll move approval.
I've got comments. So I have a few more little small edits.
Everybody has their thing.
So in section 2-20.3, commission structure, you have two A's under it, A and then A. And then in section 20.4, meetings generally, you have two B's.
Consistent.
And then in section 20.5, appeals, under B, authorization for appeal, I think that we want to reference as described in section 2-20.5C. So you're referring to the section that follows. And then in that same 20.5 appeals, section D, under time limits and initiation of appeals, at the last, in that first paragraph, the last sentence, there's a reference to a subsection. That subsection references the Planning and Zoning Commission, so I think we want to change it to reference the paragraph above. And then my final comment, if somebody could just take a pass through and make sure that the styles for the levels match or are consistent throughout the document.
I tried to do that. This is Microsoft Word, and it will get
Just
cleaned up.
somebody can.
The auto formatting gets a little crazy sometimes after a few rounds. But yeah, for the final version of it, we'll get it.
And I don't even know when you put it on the website if they show the bolds or italics, or it may not even carry over to the whatever website you use for the code. But anyways, if somebody could just take as somebody who reads codes, it's helpful when the styles are all consistent so you can find what you're looking for.
Good comments? I had a question on 2-20.2B and the strikeout of public right-of-way. And is that because we also make recommendations on matters that are not in the public right-of-way?
Wanted to leave that opportunity available.
Yeah.
I imagine they would come to you one way or the other, but just to leave that open is you're the city's experts on transportation. So
to broaden our, not to restrict, but to broaden our review.
Right. You know, maybe you have something to say about Interstate 80 at some point. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, or there's, I think in some plan, there's the idea of a cut through of the Albany Bowl property at such time as that gets redeveloped, so.
Right, okay. Right. That's all I had.
That sparks me to express appreciation that it says city-owned right-of-way. I think that was a nice thread the needle, so thank. And with that, I will now move approval, or move that we recommend, this body recommend approval of these changes in ordinance to City Council with the changes that Commissioner Paulson has observed and communicated, and with the addition of the definition of active Transportation Advisory Committee members that is already in resolution.
Second?
Second, or I'll second.
Great. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Seeing none, abstained, none.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch who made the second.
Amy. And we move onward. Item 6 is announcements.
With the conclusion of this meeting, the August recess will begin for the Community Development Department.
Woo!
So no meetings next month, but we'll be back. It's going to be a very busy fall, I think, so rest up. And just wanted to mention briefly, many of you probably already know the City Council did discuss the Solano Avenue Complete Streets study at their meeting on July 15th. They went through various elements of the study in some detail and gave some direction and to staff to make some refinements. We're planning to bring that back for their final review, probably in one of the September meetings of City Council. Don't know exactly which one yet because there are a lot of things going on right now. Yeah, that will be coming to returning to City Council in early this fall.
And also the work plan was
Yes.
after that meeting.
Yes, thank you. And I think it was our intent to attach the work plan.
It's there.
Yeah, you did, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Other announcements? May I?
Yeah, please.
Extend
time for 5 minutes.
Oh, I move that we extend time for 5 minutes.
Second.
All approve?
Aye.
All right, any opposed? None, abstain? None, okay.
It happens this weekend. There are a couple of cycling classes in Albany. I know it's a little late to schedule that in for people, but there's a hour-and-a-half class at the library at 10:30 on Saturday. I'm teaching. There's a road class, which doesn't come to Albany very often, on Sunday. I think that starts at 10 or 11. It's on the Bike East Bay website. There's probably still space in that. Good class to have. Just so you know, I've been very active with the Safe Routes to School task force, trying to support the Ocean View families. And it looks like there will be an event for K through second grade families before the start of the school year in order to share with them all the various transportation alternatives and to facilitate things like carpooling and parents forming their own walking school buses. And that's a joint project of the school district and the task force, and involves UC Village and the Y and AC Transit, hopefully, and a lot of elements that we're bringing together. So that's kind of exciting, and hopefully will provide support to the families, as I say.
Thanks for working so hard on that. Really appreciate it.
It's important.
It is indeed, but that doesn't always mean somebody steps up, so thank you.
Other announcements?
Is it bike around town tomorrow? Is that?
Actually, it was last Friday.
Friday, yeah.
Sorry, it's the third Friday.
Third Friday, okay.
So there will be
it's-
one in August
okay.
and one in September on those third Fridays, and that's an all ages, all abilities, no drop ride.
Okay. Anything else on announcements? Future agenda items? I don't know if we want to put an agenda item on the accidents or incidents at the businesses on Solano. I don't know what we would talk about about that, but I feel like it's somewhat alarming.
Good to talk about, yeah.
It's worth discussing, yeah.
Yeah. And then do we want the school district to come back at some point?
With respect to
Bike parking,
their bike parking?
staffing, bike parking and staffing plan?
So keep in mind that we don't have any legal authority over what they do on campus. And while they would hopefully take into consideration whatever you suggest to them, it would only be that. And
so we can request.
Are you offering funding for bike racks? I mean, we don't really have funding to offer as a commission. I'm not sure what else we could add to the situation.
Well, I think, we should agendize it. Especially since we only have another minute, and I don't want to extend again.
So just so I understand, you specifically to talk about bike racks on school campuses?
And staffing.
Staffing. Or the Ocean View.
Street interface staffing.
Yeah, drop off, pickup management.
Yeah, I would also support that.
Perhaps we can frame it as asking them to come give us a presentation on those things.
Yeah, I was going to say, this will really be in their hands to
Sure.
how to respond and the level of effort they put into.
I'm sorry, as we run down the last minute, the city does actually control the crossing guard program. There may be an opportunity to reposition one or more crossing guards, so we might include that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
So you're asking for a crossing guard presentation also?
You know, if we're going to talk about the interface between the school and the street, I think we have to.
Yeah.
I understand that's more time and possibly a rather large lightning rod.
Yeah, I think that's, that is, I'll just have to think about all the different things that we're managing. I wasn't expecting to take on what would be a major discussion about the crossing guard program this fall.
I know that those discussions are going on between the school district and the city. I don't think we necessarily have to address it here.
Are the first and second graders getting moved as of the beginning of the year?
They are.
Now we're getting into discussion, but
It's my understanding they're moving.
actually
So
the kindergartners, first and second graders are moving to different sites than Ocean View.
Right.
In the
As
fall.
of okay, so 3 through 5 is later. So they're phasing what they're doing on the campus. Okay, thanks.
I'd be happy to share with you my chart of the start times across the school district.
Okay. Anything else on future agenda items? Next meeting, it will be in September on the 26th at 7 p.m. And we are adjourned. Happy recess.
Thank you.
That was great.
It seems very optimistic that they'll have kids in those buildings into January.
Well, the buildings are being built out now. They're
But
framed.
they don't even have they don't even have a roof yet on them.
You know, I'm not a construction person.